Morning, everyone. Hey, David, you joined as host. Would you mind making me a co-host so I could manage the recording?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that.
No worries. It's kind of automatic when you're
Yeah,
hosting.
yeah, it just kind of grabs it. Here, let me go. All right, you're a host now.
Welcome, folks, to the March 6th, 2024 Aries Working Group call. It's a Hyperledger call, so the antitrust policy and the Hyperledger Code of Conduct are in effect. The wiki agenda link can be found in chat. You're welcome to make any changes. Go ahead and make them, even though it doesn't show up, and they'll get merged in. Here, welcome to add yourself to the attendees list. I think I recognize everyone. Is there anyone want to introduce or reintroduce themselves? Any announcements? Are we close enough to add IIW?
I'd say.
Where's my bulleted list? Come on, Sam. There it is. And that is March, April.
April 16th to 18th.
I will be going.
As will I.
It will be fun. I highly recommend it if you have not been and you are able. As conferences go, it's ruined most other conferences for me because of the effectiveness of it. It's a good time. Cool. Any other announcements we should have but don't? Any works status releases or work status updates folks want to share from projects?
Yeah, so Akapai release 0120 RC2 is out. We've got a couple more things that are in the works that we want to get finished. Did rotate is nearly complete. It's on review and verification. Connection reuse using did peer 2 and 4, which is a nice feature. So that will allow using peer dids for establishing connections, but being able to reuse them at the same time, which is something we've needed for quite a while. And so we're close with a final 0120. Once we get that out, we'll quickly focus on finishing off the 100 release, long overdue. So I put a announcement on Discord this morning about Akapai RC0 or RC2, and if anyone has any feedback on it, we'd love to see it. Lots and lots of things in it. Enhancements, improvements. At this point, no breaking changes, so that's good as well. And so we'll be testing that over the next little while, and then getting final 0120 out.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. Any other updates? All right. On our agenda today, we first have Mr. David Boswell here talking about fabric and stuff that relates. And then I wanted to continue our discussion from last week. We talked a lot about wish list goals, but didn't have a chance to prioritize them as it happens. And so I'd love to continue that and as part of a prioritization and talk about what we'd want to do during the conversion to DIDCOM v2 versus after the version to DIDCOM v2. And I believe there's the possibility to define two versions and the bigger one ideally being a sort of a main release and possibly the after DIDCOM v2 conversion, maybe a dot release, maybe something else. But anyway, dividing those into kind of two piles. I'm recognizing that smaller changes for the DIDCOM v2 conversion will mean faster adoption of it because there's less to do there. But any other, we'll get into that later, any other changes we want to make to the agenda before we get going? All right, David, you're up. Would you like the screen?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll share my screen.
Please do.
And thanks for making space for me in the agenda. I'll be relatively quick, but I wanted to talk about something that's come up a few times recently in the TOC calls as part of the annual report, annual review process. And it also recently came up on the marketing committee call, and that's when Helen suggested and recommended I come to this call. So again, appreciate your time. Um, and I'm going to give you an example of something that Fabric did, but it's not necessarily about Fabric. It's more about something they did to help map the ecosystem around Fabric. And I think that sort of ecosystem mapping could apply and could be really useful for Aries and Indy and the kind of the larger digital identity community. But just to step back a little bit to talk about the challenge that the Fabric community had and what they did to try to solve it is, in my mind, Fabric is more than just Fabric proper. There's a bunch of different things that are related to Fabric. There's other projects that you can use Fabric with, like Cacti or Bevel. There's a bunch of labs, for example. So we were hearing from people that like, hey, I have a Fabric deployment, and then like months after I launched something, I found this lab and it was super helpful and I wish I knew about it earlier. Like you wouldn't necessarily know that all this stuff existed, right? You go to the website talks about Fabric, you go to the Fabric repo and you assume, well, that's everything there is about Fabric. But then like you wouldn't know that, hey, there's also this other thing over here. There's Hyperledger Labs and there's dozens of different things and some of those are related, right? Like it's not very clear that that's the case. Um, and it's funny, we talked about this at Member Summit last year, and we were having a breakout group with people who had been in the community for a long time. And when we started talking about everything in the Fabric ecosystem, I was sitting next to somebody who was like, well, I knew about these two labs, but I had no idea about these other three labs, right? Like, so even if you're in the community and are kind of familiar with a lot of stuff, there's just a lot going on, right? And it's really hard to keep track of it all. And I think that's the case maybe for the digital identity ecosystem. And again, maybe this is something that's already been addressed and I'm just not familiar with it, but kind of my observation is there are multiple projects that kind of all relate to each other, like Aries Indy and OnCred, for example, but it goes beyond that, right? I mean, there's also labs. This is a blog post that just came out recently about an Aries related lab, right? And there's other labs. There's the Open Enterprise Agent Lab, and it kind of even goes beyond that. It's not just multiple Hyperledger projects and multiple Hyperledger labs. There's also other open source components and other communities, right? Now there's stuff at OWF. And so, like, how would somebody who comes into the community and wants to do something with Aries, for example, know about all these other components and how they fit together, right? So that's what the ecosystem mapping doc is. You can kind of scroll through here and you can see that they really did an audit and a map of everything that's going on, and they put all the pieces together, right? So they're like, hey, if you're using Fabric, here's this other project, here's this other lab, and here's how they all fit together, right? Um, and then link to it, right? So it's kind of like one place to go if you want to understand this larger thing that's around Fabric. I know you've probably heard Hart in the past talk about it. He uses these terms about like project families, and I kind of been using this term about ecosystem. So whatever this larger name is, there's kind of Fabric proper in my mind, which is, the thing that we call Fabric and it has the Fabric logo and it's in the Fabric repo. But then there's kind of this larger Fabric too, whatever it is, Fabric ecosystem, Fabric map. And so this is what they put together last year. I think it's super useful. It's something that I find relevant and point out to people. And that's basically what came up in the conversation with Helen recently. We were talking about the Open Enterprise Agent Lab, and Helen was like, well, how does it fit with this other stuff? And I think that's a totally legitimate question. And it's like, well, how does it fit? And how would somebody who shows up and comes to Hyperledger know, well, there's this piece Aries and there's this piece Indy and then there's this piece, there's this other lab over here and then there's the Open Enterprise Agent. Like, how do they all fit together? So that's what she recommended I come and talk to you about. And it has come up before, again, as I said at the TOC, because I think a lot of projects are facing this challenge. And I think it's a good challenge, right? It shows that there's enough critical mass around a project or projects that a lot of people in the open source world are building things with it. I mean, and that's open source, right? It's bottom up and organic. If somebody, I mean, that's exactly my understanding of what happened with this Aries agent controller is somebody was using Aries for a project and they needed some additional pieces, so they built a lab, right? That's great. I mean, but because it's organic, it doesn't necessarily all, it's not entirely clear how it fits together until somebody comes and kind of explains it and does that mapping. So basically, that's kind of my thinking. Like Fabric did this ecosystem map. I think it's useful. I think it's probably useful for all the graduated projects to do this. Like Bezier has the same thing. You know, we recently launched Web3J, which is related to Bezier, but it's separate, and there's labs and other projects for that too. So I would love to see all graduated projects, do this exercise, audit what's out there, the other projects, the other labs, the other open source components in other communities, and then just put a mapping together so that it's like clear for people, hey, if you're using this project, there's these other pieces that might be relevant for you too. So that's what I wanted to share and get y'all's thoughts on. So does this
This
seem useful? Is that
Absolutely.
relevant?
I think this is awesome, and I think it's particularly relevant since, at least in the Aries case, this might also be true of Fabric, although I'm just less familiar with it, is that there's a handful of ties to projects that exist in other organizations.
Yeah.
For example, DIDCOM V2 at the diff is an example of that. Um, and
And how would people know, right? You come to Hyperledger and you go to
right.
the wiki and you're like, well, does it even talk about that, right?
Um, Absolutely. So I think this is a great idea and something that we should do. That's my quick gut reaction. Other thoughts?
I'll also agree there, because part you mentioned DIDCOM as well from the Decentralized Identity Foundation. The Aries stuff can go ahead and cross communicate there, but then there's also the fact that AFJ moved over to Credo under the Open Wallet Foundation, and we can cross communicate there as well. So I think
Yeah.
having that understanding that there's other stuff out there and these other organizations would be a huge benefit.
That's great. I'm glad to hear. And it would be super useful for staff because whenever we have something like this blog post, we can put in here, hey, did you know this is part of this larger thing? And go check out this larger thing, and there'd be some place to point to, right? Like, hey, if you're curious, if you're interested in this lab, look at all the other components and all the other things that this, relates to, right?
Totally. I think that's a great idea. The other thing too is that depending on how people enter the Aries ecosystem, they tend to think that their entry point was the Aries ecosystem instead of realizing that there's more out there,
Yeah.
which I think is really useful. So
Yeah. And how would they know if we didn't tell them?
I think this is something we should definitely do. And I love having an example from Fabric that we can follow there.
Oh, that's great. That's
Um,
great.
and so
Well, that
that's
was going to be my question. Like, if this sounds like something that's useful, we're here to help, but I don't feel like I could put this map together, for example, because I'm not the
Oh
experts
no, I
that
think
y'all
I
are.
think we can. I just don't think it's been as obvious as it needed to be.
Yeah.
How useful this would actually be. We have some of this in other places, so some of it will be assembly, but making it like a top level thing within, like you have within the wiki, I think makes it a better resource for that stuff to come together with.
That's great. Well, yeah, and that's what I suspected. It sounds like you have some of this in some places, but yeah, I didn't necessarily know where to look or where to go or where to point people, or it
No,
sounds
no,
like
and
it
and
might,
that's
yeah.
and that's work that we need to do. We're familiar with it, and so we can make that happen. But just even having the idea and an example is, I think, pretty darn fantastic.
Great. Nice.
Well, and when you flipped over to the Hyperledger Labs tab there for a second, I saw the little Aries. I thought, oh, it'd be a great idea to not only have it necessarily in the wiki, and I was referring to the Aries thing down below.
The on this blog post or
Yeah, on that blog post.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
when I saw the little bit of this graph here, I thought, oh, it'd also be useful to have on the website, just sort
Yeah,
of
for sure.
showing you what's out there rather than only on the wiki.
And you can see here what we did on the Fabric page, right? So we just added this blurb like, hey, if you're looking on the website about Fabric, say, hey, there's other projects, other labs that are related, and then let them find it that way.
Uh, in addition, it lets the different projects that associate themselves with the Aries ecosystem, regardless of what org they're in, for example, provide a link and say, "Hey, we're
Mhm.
also associated with the Aries ecosystem," and then there's a link that people can use to find stuff,
Yeah.
so it provides a really convenient targeted link for that, which I think is a really wonderful idea.
Well, it's great. Well, again, if I can help, certainly happy to. Or if it's just a matter of you pulling the pieces together, just let us know where that lives, and then we'll start. I mean, we'll link to it and start sharing it, in these blog posts on the website, and other locations.
You've already helped, so I super appreciate that. That's wonderful.
Great.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions for David? Awesome.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll
Cool.
give you the screen back.
Thank you much for sharing this, and I'm glad that Helen sent you our way because I think this will be wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. No, I'm glad this seems relevant.
I'm also sure that Helen would be thrilled to have it exist for her
Yeah,
marketing
yeah, for
efforts in
sure, for
Aries.
sure. Yeah, definitely
Oh,
useful for that side.
yes, absolutely. Cool. Okay, next topic is credential protocol. Oh, so before we move on, we need one of these. I'm thinking we should just go make the wiki page so that it exists, and then we can work on editing. We'll add like a draft title to the top so that if folks come and they see construction dust, um, they'll realize we're still kind of building. But let's. I'm planning to let's make a page. I'll do that. And then we
Nice.
should try to migrate the stuff that we do have there, and then help it get organized as we do so, and that's stuff that we can review in future meetings.
All right, well, thanks. And then when you think it's in good shape, just send me and Helen a link, and we'll kind of add it on our sides, the places.
Totally, yeah. Let's let us get a little bit more organized first, and then we can circulate.
All right, perfect.
Thank you,
Thanks.
David, for coming to present.
Of course.
Cool. I'll make a wiki page, and then it would be helpful. Wikis are fast to edit, and so it means that we want to list that. I love this idea because it lets us highlight the RFCs for what they are and link to appropriate places. It lets us highlight the projects that are related, including from other organizations, and then also highlight the other types of things like other standards that we're targeting for adoption and stuff like that, generally speaking, and gives us sort of a one quick look at the ecosystem to help people understand what it is and what we've got. Any thoughts from anyone before we move on? All right. I'll work on making a page, and then that's something that we can review, and your help there would be massively appreciated for making sure everything gets listed, particularly projects that you're involved in that may not be recognized yet. That would be certainly worth getting there. But anything else that we need to add to help add color. At some point, we'll end up doing a diagram, I think, as well, that can kind of help folks understand how that relates. This is important. For example, we have testing and scale projects, and we have um, and we have uh, and we have different libraries and ASCAR and things, and people don't always realize that they exist or where they fit in. So that's perfect. Okay. Next on the topic here, this is the list from last week that we came up with as we discussed about things that we might want to touch with the issue, credential, and present proof protocols in the future. And we were not we did not discriminate between things that we wanted to do soon and things that we wanted to do later on purpose, just to try and map out and sort of consider options that we had for things that we might want to change about these protocols. There is a driving factor of making sure that when we are doing the DIDCOM v2 conversion, which is underway, that we can land on versions of protocols that work with DIDCOM v2 and also give us, of course, the abilities that we need to exchange protocol or exchange credentials. And so this is my rough notes from last time to make that happen. And what I'd love to end up with today is this list discussed and anything that we decide that we do in fact want to do, even if it's a maybe, to divide it into two piles. One would be the things that we need to address as the target version that we go to with DIDCOM v2, and then things that we want to that we're willing to wait to add later, just so that we can ease the speed of the DIDCOM v2 adoption of the protocol. And so that's kind of where I wanted to start. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about this topic generally before we figure out a mechanism to move forward in our discussion. All right, so let's try this. I'm certainly open to better suggestions. Why don't we ask for volunteers to nominate something out of this top list to land in one of these two bottom lists, with the idea of sorting them out. So stuff that you feel passionately about, that you're interested in. And it doesn't have to be that you suggested the item in this list here. But I think bringing that in would be really helpful. And that way we can sort of advocate within the community for the things, that you think ought to move to one or the other, and we can discuss those as they come up. Does that work? And does anyone have something from this wish list goal list that they would like to nominate for inclusion down in one of these other options? I'm going to start by something. I'm going to pull, I think this gets Patrick's comment too. We talked about reverting .1 and .2, and that's done.
Has that been merged? Is that done?
Has it not? Has it been merged?
I don't think it's been merged.
Almost done.
Okay.
But already in process.
Good.
Okay. What else would folks like to see move into one of the two stages?
So one of the things that I feel kind of strongly about, I guess, is I think the concept of negotiation probably shouldn't be in the issuance protocol itself.
So that actually came up. And there is actually an in-process use of it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has to stay the same way, or meaning it could extract into a pre-protocol for negotiation.
Yeah.
That could have a nice dividing line with the current protocol, but that way the main protocol itself doesn't actually have it.
So obviously the V2 version of issue credential includes negotiation at this stage. So my proposal then would be that it not be included in the next iteration. And then there's a pre-protocol that takes place for any negotiation that needs to happen.
So you're not advocating that it's a DIDCOM V2 step, but we do it after the conversion? Is that what I understand, Daniel?
Maybe I don't understand these steps of DIDCOM V2 conversion and after DIDCOM V2 conversion. So are we saying issue credential V2, straight convert to DIDCOM V2, or are we going to make changes along the way?
Well, this is the version we're going to target as the move to DIDCOM V2. This is the version we're going to target after we're all on DIDCOM V2. So the V2 relates to DIDCOM V2, not to necessarily the protocols of issue credential and present proof that we'll be targeting. We kind of already have a V3 defined, but we don't actually have to move to that directly right now. That could be, so if we find good reason to clean things up prior to the DIDCOM V2 move, then that's there. But the idea is that this would be the first protocol we implement on top of DIDCOM V2 for credential exchange during the DIDCOM V2 adoption within Aries.
I think it would be good to minimize the protocol prior to the DIDCOM V2 conversion. If we're going to do it, I would do it sooner than later, because I think that will mean the faster adoption that we're saying smaller changes would enable. I think it's actually just having a simpler protocol will mean faster adoption.
So by the way, this section of notes is me attempting to voice some of the things that you've shared with me about protocols, but I'm sure I did a subpar job. So please explain. This was the idea about splitting apart the actual pieces necessarily, but what you're proposing now is that negotiation gets pulled out into a separate protocol.
Yeah.
And you're advocating that it happen here.
Yeah.
I will second that because it would be just like having a question and answer protocol before you actually get the credential.
And that would allow for a conversion for those that are already using it, but would actually remove the either the work or the guilt for not implementing it from the rest of us using the protocol.
In pulling it out, does that mean removing the proposal? Or do we still need the proposal to enable the holder to initiate the process?
I think leaving the ability for the holder to initiate the protocol is valuable. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate for dropping the proposal, but the concept of counter offers and those sorts of things, I think needs to go away.
Yep, got it. Agreed. So in other words, the line from offer to proposal
Right.
goes away. Yeah, that bottom line, do we continue? Yes. Go back to a proposal. That goes away.
How often are people actually using credential proposal? Because in my mind, the line is drawn right here between the two protocols, and that necessarily makes the do we continue thing go away.
Yeah, in my mind, at least from my perspective, it's usually initiated by the issuer, not the holder, but I could be wrong.
Is anyone here using credential proposal outside of negotiation?
I mean, to now, it's only been done out of band as far as I know. So there's some other trigger that occurs somewhere else.
Yeah, nearly all the things that I can think of are an offer being provided to the holder, and then they evaluate.
Yep.
That's fair. Yeah, and there could be other things that trigger that the holder can do to trigger the issuer to present them with an offer that doesn't necessarily have to be a part of the protocol itself.
Like action menu.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So what we would do is then draw the line right here. And then this process of a credential proposal moves into sort of a negotiation. And then this do we continue goes away unless they support, both parties support the negotiation protocol. And then you would just simply send a problem report if the data is not correct, which simplifies this.
Well, and the negotiation effectively happens all within the negotiation protocol, and once both parties agree, then
It actually doesn't, because you basically the negotiation is basically pushback from the holder, because the next step, as soon as you push back and you propose something, then the issuer offers a new credential offer, and that happens within the normal protocol, the regular issuance protocol.
Yeah.
So the negotiation is a relatively small protocol that allows for this backwards flow of information. Backwards is probably the wrong way to say that, but it represents the holder having an opinion besides just saying yes, no. Yes, they just they just request it. No, they send a problem report. This allows them to voice back what they think they ought to receive. And if we're careful about how we split this into a separate protocol, the actual implementation should be relatively simple, because the message itself is basically the same. It's just in a different protocol family. So okay. I like that. Okay, who wants to advocate for placing one of these items we've discussed in either of these other two, either of these bins?
I've got another one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Colton.
I was just going to say, since return of supplements is a returning, since it had been removed, I think it might, as much as I'd love it in the didcom v2 conversion, I think that it could be fine after didcom v2.
No one's implemented supplements, right?
Yep, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So I like that. It's also possible, depending on what we end up with the after didcom v2 conversion, that we can end up with dot releases the same way we did before they're optional. And that way the folks that need it can move forward rapidly, but not everyone has to step forward to the same degree. So we can discuss that later, but I agree with that placement. Okay.
Would the addition of supplements also include things like OCA and branding? Is that the idea behind it?
I think there's several uses of supplements, which is why I think there's enough push to put it back. One of them is passing a credential chain, meaning a credential where the issuer of the main credential that's being issued is in fact the subject of other credentials that you have or that you're passed as a supplement. And then the other thing that could accommodate it there is OCA stuff can come along as a bundle that's passed along as a supplement as well. So yes, I said a lot of words, but yes with explanation.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Let me just add a notes here. Okay.
To just tack on one extra note to the return of supplements, I think the concept of supplements is valuable in the sense that we want to be able to, include credential chains and OCA and all that stuff. I think the original proposal for it needs a little bit of a rethink. Specifically, things like hash links have like that was a draft proposal to somewhere, I don't remember where, IETF maybe, and that has since expired and not been renewed. So relying on hash links at least needs a rethink. And we have some experience implementing as well, and there's some things that were a little tricky in the weeds and the details, and so I think the protocol itself, I'm just repeating myself in different words multiple times now, so I apologize, but yeah, it just needs a rethink.
That's my move, Daniel. Repeating myself multiple times using different words is what I mean.
Yeah, and with the implementation experience, if I remember correctly, one of the use cases was effectively providing a like signature to a hash link or something like that, or signing a hash link.
Excellent. Other things that folks want to nominate for a move?
So I don't necessarily have, I think I'm a minority voice in this opinion. So I don't think this is necessarily something that I think will ever occur. Certainly not necessarily at the didcom v2 conversion stage. But just to voice the bullet point at least, I've been of a mind to wonder whether it would be simpler to have separate protocols for issuing different credential types than trying to put everything into the same protocol and then have an attachment format which defines all the specifics of the credential type and how it gets issued. This isn't the direction that we've been moving, obviously, with the data integrity proof work that's been going on, both inside of Akapai and inside of Credo, I think. But I think we would end up with easier to implement protocols if we went that approach, even if it meant that there might be a little bit of duplication of effort. But again, I think I'm a dissenting voice there, so I don't have strong feelings that that happens soon.
I've added a needs discussion here. Is that okay there?
It's fair, yeah.
Okay.
We were
All right,
talking
so
about
that was
minimizing the protocol, and I see a bullet point saying removal of references to payments. I don't remember any references to payments, but it's a removal, and I think that might be a
I think we do that ahead. There's definitely payments in there.
I see.
Yep. I'd like to do that like in the done, almost done, and I'll add a PR for it.
Okay.
Is that okay?
I think
As far
yes.
as-
Does anyone think that's a bad idea to remove the references to payments in the protocol def?
No one's ever done anything with them, as far as I know. We actually had questions recently on it. I don't think there's any reason to include payments at this point.
And similar to negotiation, I think if they were needed, they could be included in a different protocol.
Yeah.
This is excellent. Keep it rolling.
The different protocols for different sections, I think um that's what Daniel was talking about.
He was talking about different credential types.
I know, I don't know what different sections means. Sorry.
Well, this is kind of done with the extraction of negotiation.
Yeah.
The reason I brought this up, and this was I can blame Daniel a little bit for the inspiration here, is that there are a handful of credential types where the first thing that happens is not a credential offer and a request, but actually just the issuance of the credential. So if you draw a line right here, then receiving the credential is the only thing that you actually do with that credential type. Obviously, you can't do that with things like a non-creds that have meaningful stuff to pass in the offer and in the request. And so one of the other things that we could do to further simplify the protocol for cases that don't actually need it would be to draw another, we drew a line here for negotiation. We draw another line here where it starts with a credential just being issued. And that way, this middle block of sort of the offer and the request could end up as a protocol all on its own. Yeah, this got simpler because we already kind of discussed splitting negotiation.
Mhm.
But this would split the offer and request and the actual issuance and receipt into two separate protocols, with the point that if you are issuing a credential type that has no need for an offer and a request, that you just start with the actual issuance.
That kind of goes in line with what Daniel said about having different protocols for different credential types.
A little, but it's a little orthogonal. We're splitting it by position in the protocol rather than having the actual type.
Yep.
And they're sibling concepts. Daniel, did I represent that well? And any thoughts you want to add?
I don't remember if I expressed different thoughts at some point in the past, but right now I'm feeling like I probably wouldn't split the protocol any more than it currently is, if we continue with having the attached format definitions style for the protocols. But for the credential types that do support, not having any prior negotiation, or negotiation's the wrong term, any prior exchange of information between the holder and issuer in order for a valid credential to be issued. I think just permitting short circuiting of the protocol might be the simple way to address that. So the protocol could start at offer, the protocol could start at request, and the protocol could start at issuance. And maybe just tackle it from that angle.
So just
yeah, so it would effectively be the format requiring whether or the starting points for that specific credential type.
so the formats.
So the
You just have to
non-creds, like the
right.
non-creds
So
format cannot start at request or issuance, it must start at offer. Whereas JSON-LD could start directly at issuance if all the key material is already known prior to.
Yep.
okay, so you're proposing that we just document this one,
Yep.
but not actually do it.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to put this down here.
Well, it's more than just a documentation thing because it does have implementation impacts. Because, for instance, Occupi has a strict requirement. I think right now, I think I did a quick change to test things out and see how it would work in the past, but I don't think it was ever merged. But Occupi strictly expects an offer before a request, even for JSON LD credentials, I think. And so even though it's not technically required, or it might have been at request issuance split, I don't recall exactly, but the implementation needs to, for a specific credential type, needs to be aware of the starting points, I guess.
Okay, so I've dropped this down here to actually do the split. This is in the deferred maybe never category. But the other thing that I'm going to propose that we actually move here, and I think I want to put it here since it's actual just documentation, is that we need to document that there does not have to be a one-to-one protocol message match to UX thing happening on the screen. Meaning, it's okay, should you accomplish your goals in other ways, to not represent every inbound DIDCOM message during the credential exchange with some sort of matching UX step on the user's screen. For example, we've removed batch issuance, and the suggestion is just issue them all serially. What the software could in fact do is say, hey, here's a credential, and you could, upon like second, receipt of that, or if you have more than one message from the same issuer for a credential, you could, from a UX perspective, offer a accept all credentials from issuer X button, which would then automatically accept the offers as they come in, at least for some reasonable period of time. And that means that you do not need a one-to-one interaction message. You don't need a human step to coincide with each message in the protocol. And I think calling that out will be important for people that have made that assumption. So that as long as you're doing what the user wants, it's not required in any way to represent every message with a thing. And that's part of it. We've had other discussions, and we'll have to tune this language. We've had other discussions about whether you should actually just receive the credential and then let the user throw it away if they don't want it. And there's been some debate about whether that's needed, and some voices that said, no, you actually need to know if the user accepted the credential or not. But that's let's save that conversation until when we discuss suggestions for this. But I would love to put that documentation in as well, and I think that would be valuable. Anyone opposed?
I think you mentioned something. I think this point is a little bit unrelated, but just overall, I think it's important to call out when anyone's designing UX for this stuff. It's important to have the UX be user-centric, not protocol-centric.
Right. There's no intention. There never was, but I think we've done a bad job communicating that. There's no intention that every single DIDCOM message prompts something that happens on the user's screen. You might need to for good UX reasons, or receiving consent or something, but there's no requirement to do so. Say, for example, I approve continuous location updates from my phone to something else. Like, I don't need to approve the sending of my location every time that happens if I've just already given blanket approval. Okay, our list is getting small here. So does anyone disagree with this documentation that we're going to put in there? Okay, we have a few others here that we talked about last time. Who wants to promote one of these or to one of the other sections?
It's not one of these items, but on the subject of batch issuance, as it came up with the UX discussion there, have we explicitly called out where we think that's going? Is that going to be something that returns like supplements or not?
It's been suggested not.
Okay.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay. If we did foresee a return, all I was going to propose was that be after a DIDCOM v2 conversion, I guess. So,
I don't think it.
Cool.
No one put it on the wish list. But people did want supplements back, just not batch issuance. So
The abandoned state, I think that's a clarification personally. So again, that could be done as a, wouldn't others, don't you think that's just a clarification that if the user declines to present, that should be, I mean, I don't know why it wouldn't be.
Yeah, all that really is doing is that's
It's
just
already
more of a user
documented, right?
experience thing. Yeah.
So I think that's just a clarification.
Yep.
Can I make a new proposal out of the blue, actually? Looking at this diagram right now. So we often use problem reports for an indication of like a rejection or decline. Would it be, what do we think of having just an explicit reject message instead of having problem report pulling like quadruple duty and having all these different meanings to what a problem report can mean?
Well, I was just thinking
Am I going to
something
have to bring Daniel Hardman back in here to argue for doing triple duty? I mean, that was his a big deal on his part, and he really wanted that. I don't know how.
I mean, like the state transition, regardless of whether it's a reject or a decline or there was an actual problem being reported, I guess is the same. It all moves to like an abandoned state afterwards.
Yeah.
But the lack of explicitness just on receipt of the message itself irks me a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to having an explicit message for that instead of a problem report, but instead of saying reject, it needs to be called disinclined to acquiesce to your request. I'm teasing.
Longest possible message names. That's our style.
That is a Pirates movie reference for those that are wondering where I came up with that. So I'm going to put that here with some comment here. And we should probably address that here as well if we have a similar state where like there's an actual no.
And while I understand that you can associate a problem report with a credential issuance via things like the thread ID, I also think that having the explicit thing in the protocol, even if it was still named problem report just under credential issuance, I still think that having something like that is important.
I agree. I think that problem reports serve as a really nice message when you don't know what else to say, but you wish to signal some problem. I don't see a problem with using a more explicit message in the protocol if it exists. I strongly believe that we need to retain problem report, but I think it only should be used if there's not something more explicit to say. So I like that. Okay, that covers abandoned state here, I think, although I should probably why is this being weird? The wiki's being weird. Okay. Okay, I think we've moved that one. We have 3 left, folks. There was a suggestion that we document the timeout that already exists in the thread decorator, but we need to make sure that we can. That's a DIDCOM v2 friendly thing to do, and that would indicate that hey, you've got to answer by this time for like a credential offer and you can't expect someone to honor that after that time. And this prevents someone from holding on to an offer for a month and showing back up and being like, I love my thing. And I think so. This is just a documentation issue. Anyone have a problem with sticking that in the didcom v2 conversion?
None here.
With the didcom v2 conversion, that would mean that the usage of the decorator would go away, right? Because there's not a corresponding
Yes, we'd need to
structure.
use the right method for that. And if there isn't an explicit one that didcom v2 provides, we'd need to just augment the protocol with a timeout attribute.
I would like to advocate for having just an explicit field within the protocol itself, as opposed to relying on headers or anything like that.
It could be, although having messages timeout is something that the protocol could just read the timeout field from the thing and just use it, right?
Though some message types don't necessarily, like the timeout doesn't apply.
Sure, and they can just
It
ignore the
would never
timeout.
make sense.
Right, but let's argue about that independently as we consider the PRs for this, right? Okay, we have two left. So there's a preview model. Doesn't work for VC data model creds. Could allow an unsigned version of the credential being issued.
I'd say probably after conversion. I think it's going to be necessary, but especially if we're dropping. Well, preview is used in the offer as well, right?
Yes, I believe it's used in the offer.
Yeah. I don't think it's an urgent one.
Okay, last one. Cred def references. Do we mandate that did Indy, or basically that makes clear that dids can or should be used, rather than just naked ledger references?
I don't
Daniel,
understand that one.
Well, right now, the cred def references are just Indy ledger references that don't have a reference to the network they came from, right? So this was raised, I forget who exactly raised this, but it was raised with the idea that you can stop looking for it on all the networks from an efficiency perspective. So by requiring this, or by heavily suggesting that a did Indy be used here, it then provides a network reference directly. We could make this a two-step in the section that we make it clear that it should be used, and then later on we can make a decision that it must be used.
Yeah.
I think that would be a really good way to do it, because the referencing that it should be used should be during the conversion, and that at the very least, and then enforcing it could happen afterwards.
I think I'll disagree actually on this point. I think this isn't necessary for a didcom v2 conversion at all, since it's a format specific concern. So I'd say we can consider that to be an orthogonal issue to the question of didcom v2 conversion or after conversion mostly.
So I think you stick it there. That's what you're advocating for?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. And folks, we have 2 minutes left. I want to express my gratitude for involvement in this process. This is a little fun and a little gnarly, but I think this is really important to figure this out. So a future step that we have in front of us is to evaluate the existing V3s that was declared as part of the Wacky PEX effort, to evaluate whether these things are simply clarifications or actually more changes. And negotiation being pulled out in a sibling protocol would definitely be a new one, which means that we are proposing the creation of a V4 of these protocols in order to go ahead and make these changes. And so we will need to start PRs for that, so that we can actually have targets to discuss and talk about. and I think that is a very useful activity to define these things. During the process, we can still evaluate them against what we currently have to see if we like the way we've gone or if it turned out to be a bad idea. But it'll help us definitely get there. Any comments on this process before we end our meeting today? Awesome. Thank you all for being involved, and we will have this and other important topics next week. And I am grateful for your involvement, and I wish your week is a great one, and I will fix this merge conflict. Thanks, folks, and we will talk to you later.
Thank you. See you later.
Thanks.